Hey everybody, this is Perch. Peter David, writer forever, it feels like. He's certainly not without his controversies. No sense getting into too much of that. But if you were around in the kind of early '90s, Peter David had a column called "But I Digress." Tend to have people who really liked it or absolutely hated it, and the people who hated it have held on to a grudge for decades. But in general, it was one of the earlier kind of very open views into comics. Granted, it was through his lens, so you could either take it or leave it from that perspective. But it did give you some good insight into how kind of writing works, how the editorial process works. He was pretty open about his dislike of crossovers and things that would events that would interrupt a run. He was, interesting movie critic, had pretty kind of insightful takes on films and other things. And then many people probably remember that he had a feud with Image Comics at one point, but they kind of forget what some of that feud began with, which was some commentary that the writer isn't really needed. That an artist who also writes is far superior to a writer artist combo, or two people. That the writer was not as necessary as a visual medium, kind of all this thing. It was a good lesson in nothing in its extremes works, because you get a really talented writer, you get a talented artist, and you get real magic in comics. And at the time, a lot of the image creators were flying high. They're boasting big sales, but then several of the things that Peter David kind of predicted, which was schedules would slip, it would be inconsistent in terms of how things went out. A lot of the characters would not have longevity and substance to kind of last, and ultimately, several of these books would need to hire a writer. And you did see that play out in several cases across most of the image books that kept going. In fairness, not Eric Larson, and Eric Larson and Peter David had pretty, I don't know, I want to say legendary feuds, but anyway, it was an interesting time in comics. Peter David, of course, wrote a huge run of the Incredible Hulk that's very, very fondly remembered, probably the most fondly remembered of the Hulk runs. He also was on X Factor. He did quite a bit with that team in multiple iterations, and many, many, many other pieces. He's an interesting guy. Again, great writer, and he's in trouble. So Peter David has a GoFundMe out now that was set up for him. Now, this GoFundMe is for what? Well, he's has health problems. He has bills that have piled up as a result of kidney failure, and he's had multiple strokes, certainly in the past, and then recently another series of strokes, and he just had a heart attack. So he is in recovery, and at least the news out of that is that he's responding well. He's rebounding faster than previous health issues that he's had when he had a stroke 10 years ago. But they have put a heart monitor in his chest. It's not cheap. He's in physical therapy, and he's his family is by his side. His wife Kathleen, his family, working to support him. I think he has grandchildren. Yes, he does. A daughter, grandsons, granddaughter, who are looking for some support to get through the bills. Um, so, you know, first off, if you have some extra money this holiday season, wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to head over to Peter David's GoFundMe and help pay for some of those medical bills. He's trying to raise $40,000. He's got about five at the recording of this video, so hopefully some other people can chip in. But we'll definitely give a little boost from the revenue from this channel. Assuming YouTube will pay me, no, we'll give him a boost anyway. But it raises this question, and whenever this kind of stuff comes up, there's always there's two responses that are pretty common. The first is, how could this possibly happen? How can the comic industry, which brags about having its best time ever, it's never been bigger, never been more powerful. How can one of the, I would say, most famous writers in comics, Peter David is one of the most well-known writers, How can somebody like that not be able to afford, you know, medical bills? And the answer to that is what we've talked about a lot before, and that the industry doing really really well, the industry having greater than ever years, has a lot more to do with, say, people say manga. That's an answer, but the maybe more correct one is, Viz. Viz is doing well. Viz is selling stuff like crazy, and Marvel and DC, the corporations, are certainly not poor in terms of licensing, in terms of other things. You see a lot of these comments about DC is going to evaporate, one day, and they're failing businesses, except they're not. The people who work within them are being paid, nothing, with no long-term security and no longevity. But DC, the larger entity that produces comics and licensed materials, continues to spin off pretty good money. When we saw the move from DC to AT&T, we got a glimpse at some of those books. We saw less during the move to Discovery, but we saw we saw a business that was actually quite healthy, very different from what you see on YouTube and articles. You're not seeing a business where, oh my God, we're having to cut costs. How are we going to survive? How are we going to keep the heat on this winter? It's to the contrary. You see a healthy business, but you do not see a business that's spitting off money to its employees, and you don't see, it growing in revenue like, a business with this much reach should. People point to hey, but look at this, they're removing offices and getting and even dedicated cubes and going to the hot desk model of come in and just find a spot at the table every day. And it's like, this is a sign of a company that's poor and about to just self-destruct. It's like, no, that's a sign of a company that doesn't really give a shit about their employees. That's a very different thing. Unfortunately, there's a lot of companies that are doing okay financially that don't pass that stuff on to their staff. But of course, a lot of the comic creators, and Peter David being one of them, are freelancers. They're not on staff, so that puts them at a higher level of jeopardy. And the big problem that you have here is just there is no long-term, insight into business. And Marvel's not going and saying, hey, Peter David, even though they've been working pretty consistently with him for the last 5 years, doing miniseries and kind of continual work, he's not being given hey, we're going to give you a 3-year contract. We're going to give you some forward visibility into where your revenue is going to come from, to where your pay is going to come from. And because they don't do that, it becomes a little harder for freelancers to get things like loans and insurance and other parts that would actually help them have a better life. If you have some forecasting ability, it helps you out financially. It helps you out with what you can do. Granted, there are no sure things in life, and contracts can be broken, but still, when you keep all of your creators, your freelancers, on a 3 to 6 month leash, in addition to them not putting in their best work, because, how can they? And in addition to getting stories that all feel kind of disposable and short-term in nature, because they are, you also don't do the best thing. You don't really help your team. You don't help your freelancers, and most importantly, because every time I talk about this stuff, everybody wants to come in and go, well, these creators are garbage and they don't deserve money. Yeah, but if you pay peanuts, you get the bottom of the barrel. And that's not to say that all the people in comics are bottom of the barrel people. There's some good people in there. There's people who love comics. But you are going to get some of what you see, which is people who, are okay having comics as their backup job or relying on a spouse to fund them. And, this isn't a recipe for attracting the best, brightest, most brilliant talent. I see these videos sometimes where people are like, I don't understand why comic writers are trying to, they just want to get out of comics and go to Netflix and pitch to get out of comics. It's like, you can't understand that, really? There's no money in comics. Anyone who wants to, have some financial stability is trying to get somewhere better, and that better is not in comics, unfortunately. Can you make money in comics? Yeah, you can, but again, you have to lean on other people. You have to lean on other things. A lot of people point to crowdfunding. It's like, well, just crowdfund your book. The people who are most successful in crowdfunding, you could talk to Eric July. His business is not comics. He's making a comic now, but he clearly built up his audience, his population, and his marketing through his channel, through commentary, and that's where that's where his money comes from. Comics is benefiting from that other job. That's really no different than being a lawyer and practicing and making your money that way and writing comics on the side. That's where it's at. So it is, please help out Peter David if you can. It's a shame. He is a great writer. But once again, the comic industry has to structurally change in a major way. It can't operate this way. If it continues down this path, it is going to continue to attract people who are, again, not the best. People who are looking kind of every chance they can get to get out of comics and go do something else because that's where the money is. That's ultimately where this leads without some more major changes. So hopefully, we can find those and actually deliver that. So anyway, best of thoughts to Peter or David. I hope that he has a speedy recovery, and thanks for listening.